Welcome to the My House Podcast, a show about the past, present, and future goings-on at the My House Youth Drop-In Center in Wasilla, Alaska, with your host, Michelle Overstreet.
Hello, welcome to episode 2 of the My House Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Overstreet, and I'm joined today by Kurt and Kyra Hoenack.
Hey, my name's Kurt Hoenack, and I am a client navigator at Matsu Youth Housing. That looks like peer support, navigation, so driving clients around, and sometimes we have a little men's empowerment group that I run as well. I also do the opioid response kits or the Narcan kits. I do trainings for those. I'm on the board, so I help oversee the organization and just try to help run it as successfully as possible.
Hi, I'm Kyra. I'm the lead case manager here, and we just work on doing referrals and hygiene kits, showers, doing their case plans, getting them into housing and stabilized. And I've worn a few different hats here in the building. I was the one that started the steam-driven boutique that we have. Initially, I was doing the resource manager position that we had years ago. That's no longer a position because we had so many donations coming in, and so that was the start of Steam Driven. And then just ensuring that all of our policies and procedures are correct for case management, and just being there for our clients and staff.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. I'm going to toss it back to Isaac for some housekeeping.
Yeah, before we jump into it, guys, this is everyone's reminder that not only is this episode 2 of the My House Podcast, but coming up next week, we have the second episode of Diagnonsense dropping with Justin and Kurt. We have the second episode of Redemption dropping with Stacy and Julia, and also probably about the time most of you are listening to this, we have the first episode of the My Voice Podcast. That is a client stories type podcast hosted by Mike Sessions. And while normally we won't be revealing who the guest is for My Voice, it will be done anonymously. I will show everyone a peek behind the curtain, and that the quote unquote guest for the first episode is Mike. Me and him kind of had a conversation about a lot of different things in that first episode, and I think it was really, really good. So go ahead and take a listen to that and everything else that we're producing over here at the My House Podcast Network. And also, this is your reminder that the 11th of March is Sexual Violence Awareness Day, and we are going to be doing some stuff, I think, in building and also over our social media with that. So take a look at that. And finally, the boutique. Speaking of the boutique, it has had a lot of work done over the last couple months, and they are doing a grand reopening. What day is that again, Michelle?
I think it is the 18th, but I'm not sure. Let me look.
Okay, it's probably the 18th. So if you come in on the 17th, it will still be open. So just pretend that it's the grand opening if you come in on the 17th and it's the 18th. Or if it's not the 18th, it's still open on the 18th too. So Monday through Friday, 10 to 6, right, everyone?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
So whether or not it's the grand opening, it's still open, and it looks really, really good in there right now.
Yeah,
so
The steampunk theme is really shining.
And there's a lot of
right now.
I have just walking from that entrance to my office, I just keep buying stuff from Ian at the front counter. I found some glasses today. That's where I got my Valentine's gift from. So yeah, if you have not been into the boutique, come on down and check it out, because there's a lot of really cool stuff in there, and it's looking really nice right now.
Awesome. Thanks, Isaac. That's a great update. One of the things that I thought would be fun to talk with you two about is really getting this started and having the youth input. I don't think many nonprofits, especially in their founding days, are really looking at youth voices for program design and some of the things that we really did. We included youth in every step of the way. Youth on our board. You both have been on our board of directors and offered our board that feedback. I really love that you both contributed to helping me see homeless youth as an asset in our community and not a liability. Huge shout out to Bert Cottle, who was a former mayor of Wasilla, mayor of Valdez, chief of police in Valdez. He's got a long history. He's a lifelong Alaskan. But Bert saw that early on and really jumped in and supported everything that we were doing. He'll be a guest on the show in a later episode, and really identifying that youth are assets in our community, and I think a lot of people see them as liabilities. And if you see homeless youth as liabilities in your community, you'll always treat them that way, and it will be with shame and a posture that is less than what they really need to be able to understand their capability and potential. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is just, my journey with going through mental health care and stuff is just that I think there's a lot of conflation about, homelessness being like a moral failing. Like we still have this like concept that addiction is a moral failing. Homelessness is a moral failing. John Moore just recently, when he visited, he mailed me this book called Trauma and Recovery.
So John Moore, just to fill everybody in, was the homeless director for the city of Anchorage for a short time,
right,
last year.
And I just recently finished reading that because so that's kind of what I've been up to, by the way. But I'm always reading books. But reading that, and I love it because it really bridges the gap between the history of trauma and ACEs scores where we're at today. So we're talking about learned helplessness, really, for a lot of folks that are in these situations that, a lot of kids where they've just had so many things go wrong that it feels like that's the way it's supposed to be, and it's not, but it's not a failing on their part. It's really the way I see it is that they haven't learned that there's a way out of that and it just takes people to kind of help scaffold them into, can you tell I've been going to college lately because I'm using all these Vygotsky or whatever, Yeah. Because I'm in lifespan development right now. Right. So, but Vygotsky, I think it was Vygotsky, I think, that talked about like scaffolding. Right. And that's what we do. We do a lot of scaffolding, a lot of, where they can do a lot of these things, but they've never had, if they have had support, it's been around trauma where it couldn't plug in, or they just haven't had the support to develop the tools, whatever that is, whether that's like confidence to drive, or because we're hooked up with an IT, right? So we could send them over there. So a lot of stuff that's like just making sure that they get the tools. What I wanted to say about trauma and recovery is just that, we used to view, anxiety and trauma responses as a moral failing. And in that book, it's really interesting read, up until like World War I, where we started to recognize psychological breakdown. It was all character. Everyone believed that, from a psychological perspective, it was like people just believed that if you failed at something or you didn't do well, that was a character failing because you didn't want to succeed, which is, I feel like a lot of people who don't understand what our kids go through maybe they still hold those kinds of beliefs, and so we really want to challenge the narrative.
I love that because it really amplifies the need for community. And I feel like one of the things that I enjoy the most is we have such a diverse platform for support. When you talk about building scaffolding, it's the empowerment classes and the budgeting classes and the program and the music in the cafe and the Narcan training where they learn how to administer Narcan. I remember one of the first trainings you did in the cafe for that. There was a young man there who wasn't quite 18, and we were supposed to only train 18-year-olds. And when I said, "Tell me why you want to learn this," he said, "Because I'm afraid my mom's going to die and I need to be ready to revive her."
Right.
And remember that?
It's so, opioid use is so common in our society that's like, everybody knows somebody who has an opioid dependency,
Right. So that, then that becomes, we became really his support system. We were in place of his family for all intents and purposes. I think there's a lot of places where communities are, because of the shame and the characterization that you just described. I think it's hard for organizations to open up to the community, and there's always the fear that there's going to be predation. You know, the pedophiles are going to come out, and we do background checks and have a lot of sort of insurance pieces in place for that. And it is a concern, but it's also so important that the young people we serve feel the value that we have for them, and that we believe they can do anything they put their mind to. I think there's different ways of engaging youth in the community. That's what's fascinating to me sometimes, is the more trauma they have, the more difficult it is to engage. They have trust issues that go beyond just their own experiences and that start to extrapolate out into every life situation. And that's where you see it's difficult for them. We had a college intern one time that did a study on the supper club. We serve a hot supper every day at 3:00 for anybody that wants to come, and generally a couple staff sit down and eat with them, and some volunteers from the community, and it's family style, so there's conversation and take your hat off and know how to behave at a dinner table. But the other piece that's really present in there is that sense of belonging. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that the study found was that if they came to supper club, it took less than 3 visits before the likelihood that they would engage in case management doubled.
Yeah, no, we definitely see that. We'll be like, who's that sitting at the table? And usually one of our already clients will be like, oh, it's such and such. And I'm like, oh, we haven't even met them yet. And we don't bombard them quite, we let them kind of get settled and figure out where they fit in terms of if they're comfortable or not. And then we're like, hey, we've seen you here. Is there something we can help you with? Or I definitely, I feel like we do that really well in terms of like using them as assets in terms of like, how can we help each other?
Mm-hmm. You're making me feel bad, because was I supposed to take my hat off when I was volunteering at supper club today? 'Cause I definitely left my hat on the whole time.
Well, generally the rule is that if you're sitting down to eat at supper club, you take off your hat and you don't swear. So
it's all right. We have grace for everybody.
Yeah, we have grace for everybody.
Thank goodness.
I love that our staff sits down and joins the clients there. It isn't an us and them environment. It's we're all in this together. And former Mayor Bert Cottle talks about these are our kids. These kids belong to our community, and we're all engaged in helping them. We have a supper club host today who is really a fanatic for music, and hosts an open mic once a month on a Friday afternoon, and just gets kids in playing guitars and singing, and it's really sweet, and it's really encouraging. And we're on this like constantly looking for music equipment that we can gather up, and if you visit our studio, there's guitars hanging in here that are available for use at the music nights. And so I really feel like that's an important piece, and particularly for those kids that have experienced trauma, the resilience piece of that really has to do with having, at least 3 people who really believe in you, that you can go to, that are part of your base, and that build that scaffolding underneath you.
Right. And I mentioned ACEs scores earlier. So I accidentally assumed that everybody would automatically be familiar with that, but I realize that not everybody's like studying psychology, right? Like us. But so ACEs scores, so adverse childhood experiences, and those there's something like there's a large, so as those scores are higher, so those traumatic experiences that kids experience early on, their potential for maladaptive like coping increases, not exponentially, but it definitely is higher. And I think, Kyra, just working our program, I think that you probably have a better feel for that from a statistics point of view. I'm not sure if you have anything off the top of your head, but I think that, like, you see it, though. You know what I mean? You definitely probably see it.
I definitely see it, and when the higher their scores are, usually the more intensive case management they do need. That doesn't mean that they're bad people or that they, that we need to shame them or anything like that. It's just simply that, hey, this is something that you need to be aware of, and here's how we can help with those specific things. Maybe you need to get into counseling for some traumas that happened in the past. Maybe with Stacy's trafficking specifically, maybe we need to get you in trauma therapy. Stuff like that, where those ACEs scores just really help us identify what their individual needs are. I feel like it's just helpful. It's a little quiz that we do in their intakes. For our kids specifically, and we just kind of try to utilize that tool.
Yeah, because when we started this, I think we had the option, right, for some federal grants. I think we had an option where we could go the federal route, but then that means we automatically refer out, right? Is that kind of how, if I understand that correctly? And then the challenge with that, I think, from my perspective, I always viewed us as kind of going against the grain in a good way, because, part of when kids come in here, it's not like an automatic, with my story. So I spent so many years on different medications and with different diagnosis. And I love what we do, because when somebody comes in, we don't automatically assume that there's a clinical problem with them because of their situation. And that's really what I love about our approach, is that, so we talked about that sort of like learned helplessness a little bit, and sort of the concept of like, choosing. And I think that, if the community, I love our community, and I don't feel like our community does this, but I think there's communities in the world where maybe people, they might come into a place and it's like, so if you are in this situation, then you're choosing to be homeless, or you have this problem that hasn't been addressed clinically, or you're choosing to not address it like in a clinical way. And I love that when I never wanted kids to feel like they came in here and they were in like a clinical setting where there was, because I feel a little traumatized because of what I went through going through that process, and so that I love our atmosphere, and I hope that it's inviting, when kids come in.
I think it is. I think it's welcoming. The cafe, you come into the door for the cafe, so you smell most of the time like bacon and coffee, which is two of the best smells ever. But I also think
Forgot cookies.
Oh yeah, cookies.
Those cookies are pretty.
Roger
good.
would be pretty upset.
Yeah,
right?
they're the 9-star. Roger Hammaker, the 9-star regional rep, is just a cookie man. And we do bake cookies just for him on Fridays, I would add. But so the smells are welcoming. There's always food. We have hot soup all day. We have supper club. So there's always something to eat if they're hungry, which they always are hungry. But I also think the fact that we have young people working at the desks right where their services are provided. It's not a 50-year-old person with a social work degree. Most of the time it's someone with a peer support certificate, maybe a college degree, who's got lived experience or a lived experience in recovery, like Michael talked about his story. Mike Sisson talked about his story. And so I think that really opens up. They don't feel like they're a liability. They can see that
Right.
their experience has value.
Right.
They could do what you can do. And another thing that I also really love is that our case managers are there for clients that are working in our businesses. So at any time, we have as many as 25 kids employed between the two on-site businesses. And lots of times they'll have an anxiety issue, or they'll have an interpersonal issue, or something happen at work that requires a little de-escalation or referee or
All the time.
all the time. Yeah. And so it's really cool to have these two businesses where, when the manager's going, what are we doing here? They can go over to case management and have conflict resolution, communication, problem solving, decision making, coaching that helps them to get through those. And I really think that's part of how they overcome that learned helplessness, Kurt.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. I mean, because what you're talking about is like basically learning emotional processing, right? Like, and if you don't, the challenge, what I'm challenged by is like, if we go, if you're getting triggered by this constantly and we never sit down and talk with them or interact with them, we just go, okay, this thing that's triggering you constantly is an issue, a disrupt to your quality of life. But then that's like something that like anybody who went through that experience would have to process that, right? Like anybody would have to, because these are traumatic things, these are like big things. And so they just need the time to be able to develop that emotional insulation,
It does take, it takes years. It's not by any means a slow or a fast process.
Right.
And identifying and managing triggers, I right now it feels like we have a lot of clients who have lost a parent.
Yeah, for sure.
And when that happens, there are triggers to that. And, as a middle-aged woman in the building, I think that I sometimes trigger as a parent figure. And it's so powerful to be able to have young people around them who are managing those feelings or who can walk them through processing that, just like you're describing. And it really helps to desensitize and help them to identify what their triggers are going to be when we send them into a work environment. I think they're much more capable because they've had those opportunities to back up and take a look at what's happening inside them.
Because I think, I mean, and because there has been for some of our youth that there has been so many things that if from the outside looking in, if you just didn't understand or didn't have to go through those things, that it might just look like, that the problem is something like biological, or the problem isn't the human being. And I think that's always appealed to me when we talk about youth as assets. It's like, well, if you want to build them as an asset, we have to sit with them and help them learn emotional coping skills. We have to sit with them and learn, like help them figure out, okay, if they're they have as a peer support, like if they have dietary issues, it's like I had a youth that came to me the other day and was like, they ate something and were like, I just couldn't focus in school. I said, okay, you're probably gonna, you might have that sensitivity for the rest of your life. So every day you have to practice not eating that food, right? Like, because for the rest of your life, you're going to be learning. You're not just in school right now and then you're out of school and then you can start eating that food again, right? It's like, this is a thing for me too, where I have to monitor my diet because I have sensitivities too. And like, and food can set people off and it's just one of those things, right?
That reminds me of a story of one of the kids that we had just ripping anxiety. He could hardly stay employed. We couldn't stay employed anywhere, and we were trying to train him, and he would go into work and just completely vibrate out the door and couldn't work because of his anxiety. And I remember one day somebody said, well, what did you have for breakfast? And he said 2 Monsters and a Rice Krispie treat. And I was like, oh, you think that's giving your anxiety a break there? That's the opposite of what you should be having.
I feel like we have that conversation pretty regularly.
Breakfast of champions.
Right. The connection between the fuel that you're putting in your body and the outcome is never made because they're always hungry and just eating whatever's in front of them or whatever's presented. So the opportunity for healthy food and healthy choices and the awareness of if I have anxiety and I put in 2 Monster drinks and sugar, it's not going to feel good. So I feel like there are some subtleties there that are really powerful and helpful and that those can also be triggers for addiction, because I think a lot of young people that have anxiety that makes them feel like they're vibrating like that. Opiates bring them down from that and make them feel relaxed. So it's very, it's very attractive and it's very soothing. And the perception is that this is helping me.
Right.
So 2 monsters and a Rice Krispie treat later, they're triggered.
Well, again, and that's a cultural thing where I think we look at, if somebody, when people have anxiety, and I don't think like we respond this way, but I think in our society, sometimes it's easy, I think, for youth who've had a lot of struggles to look at success and be like, wow, that is intimidating, that path. And like, I don't think I can do that. And also this drug helps me. So what's wrong is that I don't have the drug, or what's wrong is what's wrong with the equation.
Right. Or the pill.
Right.
The pill I'm taking isn't working.
Right.
Just take a pill for it perception.
Right.
But I do, that speaking of the Narcan, we've been seen as a safe place for young people with addictions to come from the very beginning. And your Narcan training is important, but the presence of the case managers. I've told the story dozens of times about a car that slow rolled through the parking lot and pushed a young lady out in overdose. And she was laying in the parking lot. And our case management team, most of whom are very young and in recovery from something, calmly got up, got a Narcan kit, called 911, revived her, and an ambulance came and picked her up. And my response was like, who would do that? What's wrong with people? Why wouldn't they take her to the emergency room?
Yeah.
And one of the kids said, because they know that you guys have the tools to be able to help them and that you'll take care of them. And I just thought, okay, well, there are worse things.
Right.
Right. That's we were able to manage that situation, and that person, to my knowledge, is still alive today as a result. So, I think in terms of just meeting them where they're at and figuring out what they need is a powerful tool.
I think that we talk a lot about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that's something that we definitely have to focus on in case management as well. Just making sure, like, if we're doing an intake or something, like before we do any paperwork, sometimes they're just hungry.
Right. Right. I've seen teenage boys come in here and eat so much food that I'm sure they're going to get sick. And they seriously, like basketball-sized plates of spaghetti and meatballs that you just go, that is going to make them sick. 3 plates heaped up like a half a basketball of spaghetti, and they don't get sick. They just put their head down and go to sleep. They're just hungry and exhausted.
Yeah. Right.
And you know what? It's I saw this in a young man who was he actually came to us from the Sullivan Arena, that it took about 3 weeks just for him to get his sleep and food and all the things in order that helped him to be able to come to work and engage with people. And I think that's part of it too, is that the malnutrition or lack of good food, the triggers that they experience and the trauma, all the different things culminate together to make their behavior seem antisocial. I know so many people in my life and my family that get hangry. Our board president came to a board meeting last Friday and said, "Oh, I'm hangry." And I love that expression, because it really is. If you're hungry and you're a teenage kid and you haven't had enough to eat and you haven't had enough sleep and your body's trying to grow, it's real easy to get hangry. And then people blame you for your homelessness. It's because they don't want to follow the rules. They're just rude and disrespectful. But I love that you said that, Kyra, because sometimes once you get 3 giant plates of food in them, they're a lot less rude and disrespectful, and they can think straight. Anything, and as we kind of wrap up this episode, this was a great discussion of just some of the elements of what we do here, and maybe it's the same, but maybe it's different than a lot of places. Do you have anything that you want to add in conclusion?
I just hope that, the perspective of, it's one thing for us to, like, sort of talk about it, but I think that people just have to come see it, and I think that, you know, it's nice. I'd invite anybody who, you know, friends and family, to come down and just have a chat with us and see what we're about. And
Check it out.
I think that this place energizes you in terms of, like, at least for me anyway, when it gets busy in here and everybody's kind of buzzing, they feel excited, buzzing in a sense of like,
enthusiasm.
Being excited about what we're doing, and it feels good.
And not because they drink 2 Monsters.
Right.
Correct. Yes.
Right.
That's hopefully.
Right. Well, thank you both for being here. I appreciate you and all you do. That's all the time we have for today. I want to thank our producer and editor, Isaac Smolden. The My House podcast is recorded at the My House studio in Wasilla, Alaska. And I'm Michelle Overstreet. Until next time.